Good afternoon. How are you guys? All good? So welcome to your last class on disaster management. Okay. So today we are going to talk a lot about floods. A lot means a lot. We are going to discuss various kinds of floods. Okay, then we'll be discussing cyclones. So today we'll start from what we left in the last class. We started with cloudbursts. We understood what exactly are the geographical, you can say, phenomenon and the reasons which are related to cloudburst. Today we are going to see the impacts, the mitigation. Then we are going to get into another related concept, that will be GLOF, Glacial Lake Outburst Flood. Then we'll be moving to the concept of flooding in general. We'll be looking into the speciality of urban floods, because this has been a recurrent theme with respect to GS1. Okay, and then we'll be moving towards cyclone. So here basically when we are going to talk about the entire concept of flood, there will be only one thing that we are going to see: overflow of water every single day. Okay, yes, the causative factors will be different. Just like when you talk about cloudburst, it is basically heavy discharge of water over a period of 24 hours. Okay, but when you talk about others, like when you talk about urban floods, when you talk about floods in general, there are other reasons as well. Apart from heavy rainfall, there are other reasons as well. So we'll be looking into that as well today. Okay, so we had seen the geography behind it. Let us now understand the kind of disaster management before that. Okay, so yes, one thing that we need to understand is that the cause of cloudburst in India, especially in the region of the Himalayas, okay, that has been orographic cause. So we have understood one thing, that depending upon the shape of the mountain and depending upon the low pressure intensity at the top of the mountain, your winds will continue keeping rising up. When they are going to rise up continuously, what is going to happen? In that particular scenario, we are going to see continuous condensation of the air, and subsequently from that water vapor is going to come down. Water vapor is going to separate out as a condensed particle, and that is going to make the cloud. Okay, so what we have to understand is something from the Indian geography, that when you talk about Ambala, okay, Ambala is basically one of the places where the eastern branch and the western branch of monsoon, that is basically the Bay of Bengal branch and the Arabian Sea branch, both of them merge, and from here onwards it travels in the northern direction in a combined fashion. Before this or below Ambala, you find that there are two different branches of monsoon which affect the various places, but after this there will be a combined branch. Okay, so because of this, what happens is that the moisture in both of these branches combine together when it is going ahead. Okay, and depending upon the position of ITCZ, do you remember ITCZ? Intertropical Convergence Zone. This was basically the zone where your northeast and southeast trade winds were supposed to meet. Okay, this is something that I also told you as the monsoon trough, meaning that when you talk about the movement of the sun with respect to the earth, so we see that when we are on the surface of the earth, we see that sun gradually moves towards the north, reaches a point till 23.5 degrees north on 21st or 22nd of June, that is known as summer solstice, and from there onwards it starts moving towards the equator and then towards the south till 23.5 degrees south. That will happen on 22nd or 23rd of December. Okay, so in that manner, what do we see is that here the whole concept of summer and winter solstice tells us the northward and southward movement of the sun. And because of this, what happens is that the ITCZ, the pressure belts, the jet streams, all of them follow the same path as that of the sun. So when the sun is near the Tropic of Cancer, that is 23.5 degrees north, at that particular moment of time, even the ITCZ deflects itself from the equator towards the Indo-Gangetic plain. Now the ITCZ in itself is having a structure like this. Okay, so wherever this particular you can say ITCZ is going to lie, that would be the zone of convergence of the northeast and southeast trade winds. And wherever the convergence is going to happen, we are going to see that there will be the formation of a front. Why? Because there are two dissimilar nature of air which is coming together. When they come together, there will be the formation of front. So this is something which is going to happen at the region which is basically going to be known as the Indo-Gangetic plain. But now it is not going to be constantly on the Indo-Gangetic plain. It may go towards the north, it may come towards the south. Okay, so when it goes towards the north and when approximately its location lies near the Himalayas, that is basically the point when the convergence is over the Himalayas. So when the convergence is going to be over the Himalayas, technically it means at the top of the Himalayas you will have an existent low pressure zone, and that is exactly why you have got cloud burst scenario coming up in the southwest monsoon. Okay, so predominantly it is basically in the southwest monsoon that you are going to see this. Okay, is this understood now? Now how does Ambala look like because of this convergence of winds? This is the sky of Ambala. Okay, so this is basically a highway that connects Delhi to Chandigarh. Okay, so this particular region is Ambala, and this is how you are going to find the weather throughout the day. Okay, during the night time when you are actually traveling through this particular region, you will be finding very you can say a small amount of mist as well. Okay, the visibility is not very clear at that time. Why? Because of the consistent and continuous convergence of the winds on both the sides. So this is how the skyline looks like. Okay, now why exactly the cloud bursts are difficult to predict? Okay, now cloud bursts are difficult to predict because they are highly hyper local. Okay, you will not be able to see this particular thing affecting a very large region at once. Okay, the effects of flooding are definitely going to spread over, but the event of cloud burst happens in a very limited area, and that is something which makes it very difficult to understand. Why? See, if you have to observe very small distances from space, you will need very high amount of observational eyes. Okay, for that matter, let us say that you want to draw something. All of you have drawn graph. You have all drawn graph. How many of you have worked with scales in the graph? You know how to scale, what is the scale in the graph? When you are doing certain practicals, the values are such that if you draw it on the graph using standard notation, let us say 1 unit is equals to 1 centimeter or something like that, it becomes a very small diagram. But when you increase the scale, this diagram can be enlarged. So many a times you might have done this, your teachers might have told you that okay, you have to use this particular scale in order to enlarge this graph. And when you enlarge that particular graph, what you are able to see, there is a distinct shape that you might be interested in knowing. Okay, for example, how many of you know this particular term? How many of you have heard this term? You haven't heard this term? No, you guys will be, because I think you guys opted for commerce. Okay, that is. Yes? Yeah, in school we do read this, but usually this is something which comes up in the class 11th and 12th. This is actually from electricity. No issues. Now let us say all of you, have you drawn this particular graph? Let me write down the variables first. This graph, class 8 physics. Okay. Now what exactly this slope represents? Speed. It's not velocity because it's distance, not displacement. Okay, very nice. So the slope of this represents a speed. Can you tell me what is the nature of movement? Yeah, it is linear, but what kind of movement? Uniformly accelerated, uniform velocity? Yes? Uniformly accelerated. Sure. Sure, or uniform velocity. So I will not screw you there, yeah. So what happens is that this particular slope is going to give you speed. Speed is equals to distance upon time. Now sometimes what would happen is that the observation is something which you have to take in very small intervals of time. Okay, but if you take it in very small intervals of time, you have to every single, let us say in 1 second you have to observe this. Okay, so every second you will have to look into that particular object. What exactly is the object doing? What exactly is the distance covered by the object? Now I tell you that the time, every minute you report me what is the position of that object. So in that particular scenario, every minute you are going to do it. I ask you every hour, so you'll do it once in an hour. So in this manner, what happens is that this graph overall might come out to be same, but the number of observations will be different. Okay. So it basically means if I am having a small time interval, okay, if I am having a small time interval for observation, you will be able to observe very closely the exact path taken by the object. Okay, what is the speed, how exactly is it moving? But when you talk about 1 minute, that detail would be a little less. If you do it once in an hour, that will be further less. So what happens is that if you have to increase your observation, you have to increase your scale as well. Okay. Now if you talk about these things, when you talk about detecting cloudburst, so it is something which will require, instead of such observations, you will require multiple number of instruments. Okay. The first kind of instrument that is used for measuring rain is rain gauge. Okay. So rain gauge is one such instrument that is used for measuring rainfall. So this is something that you would need to install at various places. Now when you talk about the Himalayas, so in these particular regions, due to the harsh terrain, many of the places do not have any such habitation. So when there is no habitation, is there any incentive for you to install a rain gauge there? Okay, so that is one of the reasons. Second, when you talk about the rain gauge, that is one part of the instrumentation. The next thing that you will need is very high resolution satellite imagery. So if we have the entire Himalayan region, okay, spanning from the Union Territory of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh all the way till Arunachal Pradesh. So if you have to scan that entire area for cloudburst, you will require pinpointed observation of various districts. Will that be able? Will you able to be do that with one satellite? You will need multiple satellites that are going to be divided in various sectors, so you could predict it. So what exactly happens is that in order to get this particular thing done, you will need very high cost of instrumentation. Okay, you will need more number of instruments, you will need more number of satellites, you will need more number of radars. Then you could be talking about, okay, now I can very accurately predict it. But just for that particular prediction, the cost is really high. So that is why prediction of this particular cloudburst event is something which is actually prohibitively expensive. Why? Because the cloudburst phenomenon may happen 5 times a year, that too limited in a certain number of months, but the instrumentation is going to run for the entire year. Okay, so if the instrument is running, it will also have a running cost, it will also need maintenance, okay, it will need upgradation. So what happens is that for a very small output, you will be having a very large monetary consideration. So that is why it is very difficult as of now to you can say predict. So our default way of doing this is actually using Doppler radars. Okay, so Doppler radars are basically working on Doppler effect. Okay, so if you remember Doppler effect, what did I tell you about Doppler effect? Do you remember? What is Doppler effect? No one remembers? See, imagine yourself standing here on the road and let any loud vehicle, any vehicle that you want, ninja, bullet, ambulance, anything, let it approach towards you. How do you know it is approaching towards you? What is going to happen to the sound? Sound increases. And how do you know it is going away from you? Yeah. So it's not intensity is one part of the story, but the point is that the frequency at which you are going to listen to that sound is going to be more when something is approaching you. And when it goes away from you, that frequency is going to be less, and so would be the intensity. So in that manner, what happens is that we see that if you are standing at a particular position, so from one end to the other, if an object is moving, it will have different amount of intensity of waves and frequency of waves. So that is what also happens here as well. Okay. Instead of that, here we use radio waves. Instead of those sounds, we use radio waves. When they strike to certain things, they are going to reflect back, but at different velocities. Okay, so that way we are able to predict the occurrence of clouds, predict the occurrence of cyclones, because what happens, they are all agglomeration of cloud, and cloud is agglomeration of water, condensed water. So what happens is that when these waves are going to hit water, part of it is going to be reflected back. Okay, the density changes, so that is why the speed also changes. So that is something which is used currently to predict not just cloudburst but also cyclones and other you can say conventional rainfall. Okay. So what exactly could be the effects of cloudburst? Because of the heavy discharge of water in one single location, it will lead to significant you can say saturation of the ground throughout. Okay, at the point where the water is discharged, and subsequently from there all the way downstream wherever this water is flowing, because there is an enormous quantity of water, the soil will not be able to absorb all of this water. So what is going to happen? There will be saturation of the soil, and when the soil gets saturated, it starts to flow like mud. Okay, so that's the first one, soil erosion and mass wasting. That is the first thing that you are going to see as a trigger from the cloud bursts. Now the next thing from that will happen is that because of this extensive amount of water that has come down, this is something which is going to cause flooding. Okay, so flash floods. What exactly is flash flood? So flash flood is basically a flood that occurs in a very sudden onset manner. Okay, it does not give you any kind of warning, and it is something where the water level rapidly rises up. Why? Because the ground's ability to absorb water is significantly reduced, and when it is significantly reduced, what happens is that all this water is unable to get stored in the ground, and that is why it flows over the surface. That is something which is flash flood, but flash flood does not give you a lot of time. Okay, in a matter of hours, this is something which is going to happen. See, those floods are usually orographic. Flash floods usually are happening just like, let us say, in Bangalore. Okay, if it rains overnight, or let us say it rains very heavily for the next 3-4 hours, and suddenly Bangalore starts swelling up with water, that will be flash flood. Okay, with respect to Wayanad, with respect to the western part of the Western Ghats, they are usually orographic rainfall. So there it is an associated hazard, that is due to orographic rainfall. Okay, their flooding is due to the continuous rainfall. Here it is sudden downpour and sudden flooding. Okay, so this is something. Flash flood is not as frequent as flood. Flash flood is, that is why, usually associated with the regions where rainfall is not expected at that level. So it is above average rainfall somewhere, and that above average rainfall actually overwhelms the entire drainage, and because of this the water comes to the surface of the earth, and then it flows. Okay, the next thing, slope failures. Again, one of the ways in which you are going to have the effect of water. Okay, because of the lubrication of the slopes. Further, at the same time, when you talk about the impact of the water, then when you talk about the you can say sometimes the chemical activity which happens with respect to water in the cracks of these rocks, that is also something which is going to result in the breakage of the rocks, and that is something which is going to disturb the slope. Again, that is going to lead to mass wasting. Okay, when this particular thing is going to happen with respect to a river, when this water comes into the river, now the river is also flowing at its full capacity, and when the volume of water is more, what is going to happen? Now the erosion capacity of water is also more. So now what happens is that the river tries to widen itself, that is known as bank erosion. Okay, and then because of this soil erosion, mass wasting, where exactly is all this particle coming down? That will come down to the channel itself. So what is going to happen at the bottom of this particular channel? You will have heavy deposition of these things, and because of that, first of all, the capacity of the river water is going to be reduced. Further, if they are having bigger boulders or bigger size particles to actually interrupt the flow, that can lead to natural damming. Okay, again, because of this particular damming, when the water stops, so all the places upstream, they are going to be flooded. Okay, so the flooding is possible on both the ways, downstream of a river because of the heavy amount of flow of water, and upstream of the river if there is damming. Okay, both of them can be resulting in you can say cloudburst. Then at the same time, infrastructure destruction that happens due to the hydraulic force of water. Okay, so these are the effects of cloudburst that we see. Now this is exactly what is flash flood. Okay, this is how flash flood looks like. So because of a very heavy downpour, now if you see, that is the natural course of the river. If you are able to see this part, that is where the river is. Okay, and this part is far away from the river, but here the water has come down because of the heavy amount of you can say downpour that has happened. This is basically Mexico. Okay, so this is what flash flood actually means. Okay, now this is Amarnath Yatra cloudburst that happened in 2023. So because of a sudden amount of heavy downpour that happened at the top of the mountain, and due to the cloudburst, that entire water came down and it washed away this portion of the camp. Okay, this is Kedarnath 2013. Okay, so this is basically what it looked like before. This is what was remaining. Okay. So what do we see? That because of this particular cloud burst, can you see that there is a lot of debris that has come? Lot of debris and various size of debris. Now this is basically due to the you can say that the landslide that was triggered. Okay, because of the heavy amount of downpour, this is exactly where the water came from, and this is how it destroyed this entire settlement. Okay, so this is how you see that this entire region got affected because of the entire you can say the presence of heavy amount of rainfall. Now Uttarakhand is particularly vulnerable to this. Okay, every single year Uttarakhand faces one or the other cloudburst event. I mean almost on every fortnightly basis. Okay, and because of this there are a lot of disruptions with respect to trading routes and land routes. That is why when you talk about Kedarnath Yatra, although Kedarnath Yatra has its slots available this time, but this is the time when most of the people do not prefer to go. Why? Because this is the time when you have extensive amount of rainfall. This is also the time when most of the helicopter related accidents happen and pilgrims get injured, or sometimes they also lose their life. Okay, because of the enormous you can say amount of rainfall that happens in the region. So can you see the destruction of the slopes here? The greenery that got destroyed just because of this. So this is cloudburst. Now how exactly are you going to have mitigation done for this particular thing? So the first thing that is going to be there with respect to any event is if we can warn the public in advance. Okay, so desirably we would also want an early warning that should be given to the people, so as to understand that okay, this particular region is cloudburst prone. Now what has happened is that we have settlements that are there at the downstream. Okay, so in the you can say in the regions of the mountains, you are going to find that some amount of settlements are going to exist, even if we are not having any kind of idea related to the cloudburst. So that is why now what needs to happen is that in the early warning system, these are the settlements that need to come up. Okay, these settlements have to be told what exactly is the you can say what exactly is the probability of cloudburst. But in order to do that, you would need heavy amount of instrumentation. So some way in which we can continuously monitor this entire region for cloudburst, that is something which is very, very important. And after the alert has been declared, or after you have observed this particular thing happening, then timely alert has to be given. Why? Because this is something which is related to very sudden downpour. Okay, so you will not have a lot of time. Just like even if you talk about a cyclone can be tracked until you can say about 12 hours or 24 hours time duration. But here you will not get that warning. It will happen all of a sudden. So that is why at the best what you can do is that if you have studied that okay, now the conditions are favorable for cloudburst at a certain location, then you can issue the alert for evacuation. Okay. The next thing here, the next thing would be that we will have to have disaster management plans ready. Okay, here a very, very important aspect is about involving the community. Okay, because the community needs to know where do they have to live, where do they have to go when they have this kind of siren coming up. Okay, so community involvement becomes very, very important. Here the disaster response has to be at the level of the village, then at the level of the block, then at the level of the district. Why? Because most of the time it is the villages which suffer. So how exactly and where exactly the villagers are supposed to be running? What exactly are the probable ways in which you would not be having any kind of scourge of water? Okay, so that is something which is very, very important. Disaster preparedness on that particular point. Okay, and there have to be emergency mock drills that are to be done in order to ensure that people, including the children, know what is to be done when a flash flood warning is threatened. Okay, then at the same time here another life skill that is added up is basically the you can say knowledge of swimming. So knowledge of swimming, knowledge of rowing boats, that is something which is very, very important for the people. But that is to be trained to them, how to row the boats, how to you can say have swimming done. Okay, so that at least you can save yourself. Okay, that is something which is very, very important. Then when you talk about infrastructure development, so here what we have to do is that first of all we have to understand what could be the probable level of the water till which it is going to hit. Okay, and based upon that, how exactly are we going to manage this water? This water needs to be taken away. This water cannot be stopped, but it needs to be managed. Okay, that this particular water is diverted to someplace else, or we are having rainwater harvesting systems, but that should be there in such a manner that it is able to absorb a lot of this water. Okay, or for that matter if the water is about to be reaching a particular settlement. So before that only you are making certain channels which is going to reduce the amount of water coming to the coming to this particular settlement and diverting some amount of water somewhere else. Okay, so that is something which needs to be done. Then at the same time it is very important to understand how to upgrade the existing infrastructure to make them flood proof. So here basically we have to understand that we have to continuously analyze the foundations of the buildings. Okay, how exactly are they going to be affected by the hydraulic force of the water, and then at the same time because of the chemical action of water. So that is something which needs to be improved continuously. Then when you talk about land use planning, so in the land use planning, someone said something? Okay. So in the land use planning, what you have to do is you cannot allow any new construction to take place in such areas. Okay. No mass development, no heavy infrastructure deployment, because this particular region already has very soft soil. So here if you are going to commission any heavy infrastructure projects, that is ultimately going to disturb the slope, and if it is disturbing the slope, it can trigger landslides. Okay, so that is why the new things that are to be done have to be done in consonance of the you can say existing phenomenon. No new development can happen in the cloudburst regions. Okay, and at the same time it is very important that these particular places also have storm tunnels built up. Okay, storm drainage is something which is very important, and not only wasting this water but collecting it at some place. Okay, why? Because this is something which is going to help you in the future to supply water downstream or maybe use for civilian purpose. So flood control is something which is very important in this particular region. Okay, then community engagement is on both the sides. Rainwater harvestment for rainwater harvesting awareness campaigns. Okay, flood related awareness campaigns, at the same time also ensuring waterborne diseases. Okay, how to deal with them, because when you talk about floods, one of the most threatening thing is basically the spread of various contagious diseases, cholera. Okay, then mosquito based diseases or vector borne diseases like dengue, malaria and all those. So how are you going to treat it? How are you going to safeguard yourself from that? That is very important here. Okay, and then at the same time, if that community itself has any suggestions for the purpose of you can say flood control, or for that matter management of the construction, using their traditional knowledge as well. Okay, so that is basically what is done here. So do you remember we talked about the Katha Kuni or Kast Kuni architecture of Himachal Pradesh? Now that is basically traditional knowledge. Okay, that how exactly are we going to make this earthquake proof? So that is why we see that because of the you can say the traditional knowledge, we can also be finding certain ways which we may not have explored yet. Okay, for flood control. And then capacity building. Now this capacity building has to happen at all the levels. Okay, first of all at the level of Gram Panchayat, all the officials including the elected ones need to be trained about it. Okay, how to disseminate information, what exactly is to be done as the first response. Search and rescue will involve the community, because the community knows where the settlements are. NDRF and SDRF don't know that. Okay, so that is why search and rescue has to involve them. So a rigorous amount of training has to be given. Then at the same time, life saving equipment that is to be used. Okay, protection of yourself from the rain. Okay, how exactly is that to be done? Now that is something which needs to be told here. Then at the same time, it is also about how to navigate in the night. Sometimes it may also happen that you are actually sleeping when the cloudburst happens. So at that particular time, how you are going to navigate, because when the cloudburst is going to happen, the first thing that is going to be going off is the power. Okay, and that is a preventive measure that the power is taken down. So you are technically navigating in the dark. How do you navigate? Okay, how do you find the high point where you have to go? Now these are the things that need to be told. So that is something which comes under capacity building, apart from the research and development that needs to be done for the purpose of improving our cloudburst prediction technology. Okay, so that is NDMA's guidelines on this, that what exactly should be the research. And this is not about just understanding where cloudburst can happen. We need to decode how fast a cloud is going to form in various places. Okay, if we are able to understand the movement of the air, if we are able to visualize that or model that, and then we understand what kind of cloud is going to be formed in what time frame, we'll be having a better way to predict this. Okay, but in order to do that, we will have to go with a lot of super computational models. A lot of computational models need to be built up. So for that, research and innovation should be the primary focus for disaster management. Okay, now going to floods in general. Okay, so when you talk about flooding in general, so flooding is the natural overflow beyond the capacity of any vessel, okay, of a liquid. Flooding is something which can happen when you are actually using a bucket. So when the bucket is completely filled, so after that whatever water you are going to add into it is going to spill out. Okay, that is also flooding, and flooding is exactly that particular part. When the water is going to spill out from the natural, which is beyond the natural capacity of holding of any object. In this particular case, that is usually the natural water bodies like lakes, rivers, ponds. When they are not able to hold this particular water, it is going to overflow. That is flooding. Okay, but the point is how exactly flooding is going to happen. For flooding to happen, there is a very important precondition that needs to be met. The rate at which you can be absorbing water, or you can say accumulating water with yourself, that is going to be lesser than the amount of water that is falling down. So rainfall's rate is going to be greater than the capacity of the nature to absorb this water. So that is the situation when you will be having flooding. Okay, so that is why when we talk about flooding, so there are various types of floods that happen based upon the surfaces that are there. So the first kind of flood is basically river or fluvial floods. So this is something which is associated with the overflow of the river channel. How exactly does this happen? So when the rivers are going to flow, the flow of the river is always in a defined channel, in a defined path. So when there is suddenly a lot of amount of water that comes into this particular river, which is beyond the holding capacity of the river, so what is going to happen? It is going to spread out this water in the neighboring regions. Now that is something that you have seen as floodplains. Okay, so that is something which is known as river floods. So how exactly can river flood happen? River flood can happen because of various reasons. The first one, heavy rainfall upstream. That somewhere in the upstream, wherever the river has been flowing through, it has experienced heavy rainfall. So because of this, what is going to happen? All this water ultimately is going to come down to the river. Okay, now that is going to increase the volume of the river. The next thing, there is some kind of glacial melting that has accelerated. So when the glaciers are going to melt at an accelerated pace, what is going to happen? This entire you can say water is going to add up to the capacity of the river. There is any kind of you can say release of water from certain dams. This is another reason that when you talk about the opening up of the gates of the dam in order to regulate the quantity of water it can hold, then also heavy amount of water is going to be coming into this particular river, and that can also lead to flooding. For that matter, failure of the dams, even then this is going to happen. That because of the failure of the dams, a lot of water suddenly gets into the river. Okay, that will also lead to flooding. So there are various causes. Then at the same time, when the river is flowing, okay, if the bed of the river or the bottom of the river is getting continuously filled with silt, sediments, now what is going to happen? The capacity of the river is going to reduce, and when the capacity of the river is going to reduce at that particular time, this water is going to again flood out. Okay, so there are several reasons why this particular flooding can happen. Then the second one that we have is something which is known as surface or pluvial floods. Okay, so where exactly do you see surface or pluvial floods? Now this is something which is going to happen in those regions which have concrete structures. Okay, so what happens is that when we talk about soil, soil has a tendency to absorb the water because of its porosity. Okay, but yes, then again we have certain types of soils that are not able to absorb water. When you talk about clayey soils, so clayey soils become hard when water gets inside them, and once they become hard, they will not be allowing any more water to come inside them. Okay, so either the ground has become that hard, or for that matter we are talking about those regions where you will see a sudden heavy downpour, and because of this downpour, whatever is the amount of soil and whatever structures are here, they are not able to absorb this water. Okay, so this overflow of the water is something which is known as surface or fluvial floods. Then you have flash flood. So in flash flood, the reaction time is less. That is what we are understanding. That here, because of the intense heavy high velocity rainfall that has happened, it very quickly fills up the entire region. Okay, so this rainfall is not going to be for a very long period of time, but this is going to be very fast. Okay, and then subsequently what happens? Because of this, we have sometimes, because of the impact of the you can say the raindrops at that particular time, sometimes it also damages the buildings. Okay, continuous amount of water, when it impacts a particular thing, including the windows of your car, sometimes they break. Okay, why? Because they are very you can say heavy drops that actually fall down. Okay, and apart from that, they are also accompanied with hailstones. Okay, so because of that, it becomes a little difficult to manage. Then you have coastal floods. So when you talk about coastal floods, now coastal floods are triggered by tsunami. Coastal floods are triggered by storm surges that basically are accompanied by thunderstorms and cyclones. So technically what happens? The water from the sea inundates the land. So when it is inundating the land, what happens now? Salt water comes inside the land, and that is something which actually is called as coastal flood. Then sometimes what also happens is that apart from a storm surge coming towards the land, it is also accompanied by a high tide. So in high tide, the height of the wave is already high. Okay, the height of tide is already high. It is accompanied by the storm surge. So more amount of water is going to come over the land. Okay, so then what happens is that it is going to result into coastal flooding. Finally, you have urban floods. Now, urban floods are purely a result of two things: replacing natural soil with concrete structures. Second, clogged drains. Okay, yeah, drains which are clogged. So when you talk about these two, what happens is that because you do not have any surface to absorb this water, so this water cannot go underground. Second, when the drains are going to be clogged or the drains are choked at that particular moment of time, this water is very quickly going to fill up the drains. And when it is going to very quickly fill up the drains, this water is going to come over to the streets. Okay, so that is something which is going to be called as urban floods. Now there are a lot of different you can say places on the there are a lot of different cities that actually also maintain something which is known as storm tunnels or storm drains. Okay, that is something which is known as storm drains or storm tunnels. So when you talk about these are separate network of tunnels or drains apart from the natural drainage system of that particular region. Natural in the sense the one which is made by the municipality for the purpose of drainage and sanitation. Apart from that, these are actually certain additional channels that have been built up so that when excess amount of water flows or excess amount of water falls in the city, that is something which will be absorbed by them. But the point is that this particular thing is not existent in most of the cities in India. Okay, so they actually act as one of the backups if the you can say the municipal drainage is something which is overwhelmed, then these drains are the ones which automatically get opened up. Okay, so the water from there flows here. Sometimes what also happens is that they are found in certain regions where there is an inlet from where the water can flow separately and not from the municipal waste. Then this particular water is the one which is collected at a underground reservoir. Okay, so in this manner what happens is that first of all the excess water that is significantly reduced, and then this water is not directly discharged into the drain or the river. This is something which will be used for the future purposes after water treatment. Okay, so this is something which is present in various cities. You talk about London, you talk about Singapore. Okay, various cities have this, but most of the places in India do not have this, and because of this we are left with only choked drains, okay, ill managed drains, and then subsequently heavy amount of rainfall which is currently happening in a lot of different places. So that is something which is resulting in floods. Okay. Now the natural causes of flood, this is something that we have seen, that is predominantly due to torrential rainfall. That could be either due to cloudburst, that could be due to the presence of ITCZ that we have seen, okay, or for that matter atmospheric rivers. Now atmospheric rivers are basically very high moisture winds that are present in the atmosphere which condense to make very big clouds. Okay, so they are formed usually near the equator and somewhere above the equator. So that is why this is something which can cause some amount of rainfall in those regions which are very near to the equator. Okay, so they are basically the ones which deliver this particular moisture very quickly. Then apart from that, the next thing could be the melting of the glaciers. So because of the melting of the glaciers, what can happen is that this water is first of all going to add into the channel. Further, the caving of the glaciers or the coming down of the glaciers can also create some artificial dams. That is something that you are going to see in GLOF. Okay, both of them can result in the you can say a sudden outburst of water, and this is something which is going to let the entire region get inundated. Third one, presence of clay heavy soils. So the clay heavy soils are basically the ones which have very poor absorption of water. So because of this, what happens, whatever water is going to fall down after initial absorption, all the water will remain on the surface, and when that remains on the surface, it is something which will be blown away. This is something which is going to call as surface runoff. Then when you talk about other causes, that would be deforestation, because deforestation is something which uproots the trees. Trees are the ones which hold the soil together, and when they hold the soil together, they have a lot of they improve the soil, the water absorption capacity of the soil significantly. Why? Because the trees themselves, they use this particular water. So that is why this is something which actually hurts the entire process of water absorption. Further, with respect to deforestation, what also happens is that during flooding, the topsoil gets eroded. So when the topsoil gets eroded, this soil is ultimately going to get deposited in any of the drain or any of the river. So what is going to happen? The capacity would be reduced. When the capacity is reduced, again this is something which is going to result in heavy flow of water, heavy flood. Then unplanned urbanization, meaning that when you have unplanned urbanization, so you are not very you can say considerate about what exactly is the kind of slope of the drainage that is going to be there. Usually what happens is that there are certain main drains that are there in the entire city, okay, in which you actually divert or direct your entire you can say the drainage of the entire city. Okay, why do you do that? Because there would be a centralized water treatment plant from where the water is then going to be discharged into the sewage treatment plant. But the point is, when the urbanization is randomized, so what happens is that every single place is going to have its own version of drainage. And because of that, what happens is that there is no natural way in which the water is going to fall down into a main channel. And subsequently, because of that, we see that a lot of the water here, okay, that ends up getting choked with each other. Okay. Further, we do not have any such treatment of this water at the level of the households. So municipal solid waste, many a times what we see is that people usually throw away polythene bags, okay, gunny bags into this particular drain, okay, as a waste. Now these are the ones which are going to choke the entire you can say outlet. So what is going to happen? The water flow is going to be stopped. So that is something which is responsible for you can say the flooding. Apart from that, wherever you are going to have any kind of urbanization, you will be replacing the trees with concrete. Now when there is concrete, it is going to replace the soil, and concrete is made in such a manner that it is going to be impervious to the water that is coming over it. Okay. So that is basically what happens here. Then encroachment of floodplains. Now this is something seen very commonly with respect to various parts of the world. Now floodplains are basically the ones which are very nice alluvium. This alluvium is something which is very attractive to the farming as an activity. So what exactly people do? They live dangerously close to the floodplains. So now floodplains are already demarcated that this particular place is the one which will be inundated whenever the water is going to come up. But because of the expanding population, people are forced to live here. Okay. Sometimes they are living here by choice, just like when you talk about Brahmaputra. So Brahmaputra is revered for this particular thing. People every single year they reconstruct their homes, okay, because of this particular alluvium soil. Okay. So those are the you can say those vulnerabilities. Now with respect to India, so in India, flood is a very common and it is a very recurrent kind of you can say disaster. Flooding usually happens mostly in the time of monsoon. Okay, this particular time, whenever the monsoons are good, and even now when we are in the El Nino phase, there are certain regions in the country that are having heavy amount of rainfall. So because of this heavy amount of rainfall, in the regions where there is heavy amount of rainfall, you may find flooding. But at the same time, in some other regions, you will find drought. Okay. So this is basically the variability of monsoon with respect to India. Not the entire India is going to be flooded. Okay. The second thing, when you talk about it, whenever there will be floods, floods are going to be associated with forced displacement of a lot of people. It will result in damage of crops, and at the same time it is something which is also going to be responsible for disruption of transportation and communication. Okay. So what basically happens due to flooding is that we lose a lot of our economic output as well. Okay. Students lose their school days or teaching days. For that matter, the people who are dependent upon casual laborers or daily wage laborers, they do not get their food or their income. So in this manner, what do we see? That floods are something which are a recurrent disaster in India, but at the same time, this is something which is associated with a lot of economic losses. Okay. One of the major is farm-based activities. So agriculture faces a lot of harms, and that is why floods are something which are administered by the Ministry of Farmers, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. This is basically the ministry that handles floods. It also handles drought as well as cold waves. Okay, it is responsible for handling them because the primary victim is agriculture. Okay, then subsequently it is something which causes a loss of about 75 lakh hectares of land. Okay, now this is on an average, this is not something which is the maximum value. On an average this happens, that 75 lakh hectares of land gets you can say affected by flooding. But now this flooding is general. This flooding is going to be related to the glacial lake outburst as well as the urban flooding and cyclone storm surges as well. So because of this, what happens is that we have a lot of land that gets degraded. Okay, especially in the coastal regions when the flooding happens. So salt water intrudes into the soil and then subsequently the soil loses its fertility. Okay, then about 1600 lives are lost. Now that is basically related to thunderstorm related event. Some people get drowned, some people they get washed away. Okay, so or for some of them sometimes the roof collapses because of the heavy rainfall. So that is something which results in fatality. And then the overall damage is estimated somewhere near 1805 crores every single year on an average. This is the loss that India faces every single year. Okay, further at the same time there are certain floods which are major floods, meaning they are long lasting, they are high volume and they have high destruction. When you talk about Wayanad which happened, when you talk about Bihar Kosi floods that happened, Kedarnath that you saw. So these are all major floods. This particular year we are seeing Arunachal Pradesh was flooded because of a GLOF. So they are all result of this particular you can say phenomenon. Now how exactly are the floods going to be managed? For the management of flood, one part of the story is to understand what exactly are the causes. The second part of the story is basically to identify the regions which will be the most prone to flooding. So that is why the first thing that you have to do is map those regions which will be flood prone. Okay, where exactly are them, and then subsequently based upon where exactly are they located, what is the risk that is involved. Okay, till how much depth into the land will the water get intruded. Okay, now that is something which will be called as the floodplain. So floodplain zonation is very important for all of us. Okay, because unless we are able to understand what is the amount of land that is going to be affected by the flood, you will not be able to understand what is the amount of land that is available for any kind of infrastructure development. Okay, that's the first thing. Then the second thing would be forecasting and warning. How exactly the floods are going to be forecast and then how exactly they are going to be warned. So because of this, what is happening is that all the dams which are there in the country, okay, they are the ones which are equipped with siren systems, they are equipped with automatic rain gauge, and at the same time there are certain alert systems which are there based upon the operation of the dam, which continuously relays the level of water in the dam. So what happens is that when the level of the water continuously keeps on increasing, very gradually you keep on you can say releasing the water into the river. Okay, why? Because this is something which is going to ensure that sufficient amount of volume is available in the dam for the purpose of holding the water due to the rainfall. Okay, so a controlled amount of breach is something which is done. Then at the same time, all the places which are downstream, they have siren based systems. Okay, so they have sirens for the purpose of flood incoming flood warnings. Then at the same time, it's also about the use of the satellites for the purpose of understanding what is the amount of rainfall that is happening. So that is why they are the ones which have been integrated with the cyclone warning system CWC, okay, and Central Water Commission, and we have IMD, Indian Meteorological Department, and these are basically the the various departments of the government of India that is going to handle the floods. Okay, but they have different instruments. When you talk about Central Water Commission, they are going to talk about what exactly is the situation of surface water. In association with Groundwater Commission, they will be understanding the groundwater table. Then when you talk about IMD, they are responsible for weather forecasting. So they are the ones who are going to give very detailed weather forecast. That is why every day there are two weather bulletins that come up from IMD. One comes at 4 o'clock, the other one comes at 8 o'clock. Okay, in the morning there is one, in the evening there is one. That tells you in what regions of India what kind of weather is going to prevail. Is there any severe or serious weather that will be there, and based upon that what are the expected directions that are to be given to the district administration. So they are the ones which come up with these particular you can say bulletins. Now when you talk about structural mitigation here, so the structural mitigation with respect to flooding, would be somehow to stop the water of this excess water to come into the land. Okay, so one part is stopping that water. Second part is, if the water comes, then what are you going to do? Okay, so in order to stop the water, what you can make are certain embankments and walls that are going to prevent you from having that particular water come on the land. So that is something which is known as flood wall. When it is there at the level of the sea, it is known as sea wall. Yesterday you saw the sea wall, which were tidal return, you can say wave return walls. Okay, so they are one part of the story which are going to stop a significant amount of water from coming into the land. That's the first part. Okay, the second part would be, when you have this particular water coming into the land, how is this water going to be managed? So for this, you should be having your, first of all, your municipal drains should be cleaned. Every municipal drain should be cleaned periodically so that this amount of water can then be very easily flowing away. Apart from that, the building up of these storm tunnels and storm drainage, that is very, very important, because if we don't do that, we will not be able to absorb this amount of water. Third, instead of having flat roofs, we should be mandatorily implementing rainwater harvesting. Okay, so rainwater harvesting in all the kinds of buildings, private, residential, commercial, all kinds of building, if they have rainwater harvesting. So this is something which is going to not only help us recharge the groundwater, but also absorb a significant amount of volume of water which otherwise is going to flow on the streets. Okay, so these are basically the various kinds of structural mitigation measures that can be taken. Then with respect to dams, okay, now dams in India are constructed primarily to flood, to control the flood and then supply this water to irrigation. Okay, so for that, the dam safety also needs to be ensured, that the dams are having sufficient amount of you can say reinforcement, it is not failing at its foundations, and at the same time, what is the amount of siltation that is there at the dam, because the dams are also going to stop a lot of sediments, and if those sediments are there, again the capacity of water is going to be reduced. So regular siltation, regular servicing of the dam is also very, very important. Okay, so these are structural mitigation measures. Now this is basically what is known as an embankment. So embankment is kind of a raised platform which separates the area which is going to be flooded, that is the flood plain, from the area which is going to have the settlement. Okay, so that is what is known as an embankment. So it is basically an area like a trapezium. So this is what you see in nature as embankment. Okay, so this particular area is the one which will get flooded, but that area is the one which is supposedly going to be clean. Okay, this is embankment. Now this is basically what is a flood wall. Okay, so this particular river has flooded, but it has not affected the residents. So basically what happens in this particular case, you would be able to move around. At least you have a chance of escaping. Then at the same time, you are also seeing that although there is a lot of rainfall, the water is not stuck. So it basically means that you also have to have good amount of drainage for this water to go away. So are you seeing this particular channel? That is the storm channel. Okay. So storm channels from all the places are going to then integrate together into a central large storm channel. From there it actually goes into certain reservoirs, that is known as storm reservoir. Okay. Now this is basically a kind of underground tank that we have at our houses, where we receive the municipal water and then we pump it to the tanks. Okay. So then when you have this particular water available at your central reservoir, from there the water can be treated and then supplied for civilian purposes. Okay. So that is what we want to do. Then what are the non-structural measures? So when you talk about non-structural measures, these are policy measures. Okay, structural measures are engineering measures that you have to do over the land as construction, but non-structural measures are policy measures. So here you would be having the hazard zonation, that you will be having the floodplain zoning, that is going to tell you which amount of land which is near the floodplains is going to be vulnerable to the floods. Why exactly is this important? Because we have ghats on the river banks. Okay, and these ghats are actually used especially in the North India for the purpose of cremation. Okay, so then what is going to happen if you are going to make such ghats, if you want to make you can say places of religious importance, recreation, you should know where exactly can they be created. You cannot go dangerously close to the floodplain. Okay, so that is why floodplain zoning is very, very important for the purpose of understanding how to use the land and where to allow settlements to happen. Okay. The second thing is that the building bylaws should always be amended so as to ensure that in the flood prone areas we have flood resistant structures. So here you will be having stilted house. Okay, again meaning the same thing, that there will be pillars over which the basement of the house is going to be constructed. Okay, so that is going to be significantly raised from the ground level. And at the bottom, you are not going to put anything electrical, anything chemical, anything explosive. Okay, why is this? Because when these are the things that are going to be present at that particular moment of time, these things will be explosive when they come in contact with water. So that is why at the bottom you don't want to place these things. So these restrictions have to be there in the bylaws, and then strict implementation of them has to be there. Now apart from that, insurance schemes for the purpose of flooding. Now this is something which is partly covered with respect to the various you can say insurance scheme given by the government to the farmers, but not to people in general. Okay, so natural disaster insurance is one such, you can say, region of insurance which is still under consideration, but no step has been taken by any organization or any government towards that. Okay, so as of now everyone is working on the model of compensation, no one is working on the model of insurance. Okay, I told you that there is only one limitation with respect to most of the insurance schemes, that is force majeure, something which is beyond the control of anyone. That is what includes natural disaster, also known as act of God. Okay, then what exactly would be the preparedness and response? This is something that you are usually going to find everywhere, that there should be a command center. Okay, now this command center and the command system is something which is going to be the central responsive you can say system that is going to be handling all the responses. So this is something which will be at the level of district, at the level of the state, and from there the instructions are going to pass. Okay, what exactly is the amount of you can say relief material that is to be sent, how exactly is that to be sent, is there a requirement for the purpose of rescue and evacuation, do we need NDRF and SDRF teams, or are the volunteers and NGOs enough? Okay, they are the one. Then at the same time, what is your medical preparedness? Okay, because this would be the time when you would require extensive amount of medicines, and at the same time this will be the time when you will be having contagious diseases spreading out. Okay, so what is the medical preparedness that we have? How are we going to handle the casualties? Then first aid, these are the things that are needing to be given. So extensive amount of training has to be done at this particular end. Okay, so that is why capacity building is something which has to happen from the very of the bottom of the grassroots. So it will involve a part of public awareness generation, involving the community for the purpose of cooperative search and rescue and subsequently evacuation. Then at the same time, the students, they are the first one who are to be made aware of these things. So that is why flood management, natural disasters are a chapter that is included in our books. Okay, there are certain courses separately that are offered by various universities and NIDM. Okay, research work that is dedicated on all the sides, disaster management, disaster medicine, disaster management, logistics, everything happens like that. So there needs to be constant capacity building on this front. Okay, want to take a break? Take it. Come back at 13:40, 1:40. Then we'll start with GLOF. Chalo. Let us begin with glacial lake outburst floods. So what exactly are glacial lake outburst flood? This is a consequence of melting of glaciers. Okay. So when the glaciers melt, so two things happen. One, it gives out a channel of water. Second, it talks about the erosion that basically the glaciers are going to do while they are moving down the slope. So when the glaciers move down the slope at that particular moment of time, they bring in enormous amount of eroded material, which then get deposited at a certain distance, which is known as moraines. Okay. So here for the glacial lake outburst flood, you will need moraines. Okay. And both the kinds of moraines, you will need terminal moraines and lateral moraines. Okay. So when you talk about these moraines, these are basically the depositional feature of glaciers. So basically what happens is that when you talk about the terminal moraine, if this is the direction of the glacier movement. So a terminal moraine is basically the one which is going to deposit the material at the front of the movement, perpendicular to the direction of it. When you talk about lateral moraines are basically the ones which will have their you can say deposition in the parallel direction of movement. Okay. So because of this, what happens is that a kind of embankment is created. Okay. So a kind of embankment which you just saw gets created, and here what happens is that whatever is the melt water of the glacier, that will keep on depositing here. Okay. So gradually this entire region which has been bounded by these moraines, it becomes a lake. Okay. And when this becomes a lake, so it will also hold a limited amount of water that is going to be dependent upon the height of these moraines. Okay. How tall these moraines are, that is how you will be having this particular you can say deposition. And then basically apart from that, what is going to happen, the water, once it is full to its capacity, now the water is going to overflow. That is something which is known as glacial lake outburst flood. Second thing, when the water is continuously going to be stored in this particular moraines. Okay. So now what is going to happen with the water getting stored here, with every single liter of water added, there will be significant amount of pressure that will be increased on the moraines. So sometimes what happens, the walls of the moraines, they are basically the ones which rupture. So when they are going to rupture, that is going to result in a sudden flow of the you can say the of all the water here. Okay. So these two are basically what are known as glacial lake outburst flood. Okay. So this is something which is a peculiar feature of the mountainous regions involving a glacier. Okay. So I'll just tell you what exactly happens. So this is basically the kind of you can say glacial lake that will be there. On one part of it would be the glacier. This is the glacier. Okay. Now this is basically the part that has been made out of the moraines. So these are the the lateral moraines, and this is the terminal moraine. Okay. So the water from the melt will keep on depositing here. Now when the water is going to overflow because of the accelerated melting of the glacier, that is one of the reasons. The second reason could be because of the massive displacement from either a landslide or an avalanche. Okay. That also is going to create some amount of water which is some amount of disturbance which is going to cause the water to spill out. Third thing, these walls are the ones which may break, they may fail. Okay. So in that case, this water will suddenly come downstream, and it is going to cause flash flooding. This is another example of flash flood. Okay. Although technically there has been no such you can say precipitation, cloudburst or anything. This is purely the movement of the glacier, or for that matter that could be triggered by a landslide or avalanche. But what is the output? Very rapid flooding of the downstream regions. Okay. So when you talk about glacial lake outburst flood, now this is basically the 2023 Lonak Lake flood with respect to Sikkim. Okay. So here I'll demarcate certain things for you. This is the glacier. This part is the glacier. Okay. So the first thing that you must be seeing, okay, I'll not write it there, I'll write it somewhere else. This was a very severe, you can say, a glacial lake outburst flood that happened in Sikkim that almost submerged the entire Sikkim. One of the most severe glacial lake outburst floods we have seen. Now, are you seeing the first thing that with respect to the formation of this lake? Now, these are the terminal moraines. These are the lateral moraines. Okay, this is the terminal part. Lateral is basically the one which is depositions parallel to the flow of the glacier direction. The glacier is flowing in this particular direction. So, when the depositions are going to happen parallel to the flow of direction, that is something which is going to be known as lateral, and terminal would be the one which is going to stop this particular movement, that is terminal. Okay. So, now what has happened? Are you seeing this particular channel? This has basically been the channel for floods. So, this is basically where the GOLOF channel is. So, any kind of you can say movement of water is going to be from this particular side that has happened in the past. So, that is why a kind of channel has been made. Okay. Now, basically what happens is that during the times of summers, the area is going to expand. Okay. So, this is the small, you can say, opening that you are able to see there. This small opening is basically the one from which the water was naturally leaking out. Now, that is something which can be managed. Okay. Now, technically what happened was that, are you seeing first of all the difference in the ice cover? This is what global warming does in 5 years. See the ice cover there, see the ice cover here. Okay. So, glaciers are melting in an accelerated fashion. Now, at that particular moment of time, this ridge that you were seeing, this collapsed. See the amount of water that came down. See the water here, see the water here. This is what is the exact moment of this entire glacial lake outburst flood. Okay. So, here technically what happened was that this is the small opening that was there initially. Now, this was replaced by another opening. Okay, and the water significantly got reduced. See the volume of water there, see the volume of water here. Why? Because now more deposition has happened and it has stopped this particular flooding, and whatever water was there, it flooded downstream. So, in reality, it looked something like this. This is glacial lake outburst flood, Sikkim. Okay, and it was so intense. Okay, this is something, what you are seeing here, you know, what is this? This is Teesta river, and it is very low. It is not something, this is actually a part of you can say mountain. The water has risen to this level. Okay. Now, this particular flood actually resulted in complete submergence of one of the power plants on the Teesta river. Now, Teesta basically has got 5 stages of power plants. Okay. So, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay. Out of these, Teesta 3 was completely submerged in this. Everything gone. Okay. And I did my internship in Teesta 5, a few kilometers from here. This is what happened. Okay. So, that is why when you go, first of all, Teesta in itself is a very aggressive river. It does not matter how far you are, you will listen to the roar of the river. You are not going to listen to the flow of the water, you are going to listen to the roar. And when it rains, it becomes even more. Okay. Now, just imagine this glacial lake outburst flood, what it would have done. So, at various altitudes, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay, 5 stages. So, I was at the downstream level. Teesta 3 is technically the plant where one of the reservoirs is there for the purpose of flood control, and the second one is basically this thing. Okay, the direct run of the river power plant. This is something which happened, and this road actually connected to that side. Everything goes away. Okay. Now, so we were talking about this particular incident, Lunak Lake. Okay. So, the water ultimately came down to Sikkim's Teesta river. Teesta is the longest river of Sikkim. Okay. And this is something which happened due to two simultaneous events, an avalanche and a cloudburst. That is something which actually led to the collapse of the moraine, and subsequently you had the entire Chungthang Dam. This is the one which washed away, completely gone. Okay, and this resulted, these 40 people were actually, most of them were actually operators of the dam. They lost their lives in this. Then other people as well. Then another disastrous event happened in 2021, Chamoli. Okay, Chamoli is always, you can say, in news because of this, Tapovan. Now here also NHPC was undertaking another hydropower project. Okay, here it was basically the Rishi Ganga on which this particular thing was going on. Okay, but because of the GLOF, which was again triggered by an avalanche. Okay, because of this, it completely washed away not just the you can say dam, but also the infrastructure that was built. All the offices, the turbine shaft, everything was gone. Okay, so the Vishnugad project, this was something which was completely washed away, and still there are people who are missing. Okay, then you had Kedarnath. So Kedarnath you saw in the previous session, you saw Kedarnath. So that was also because of the GLOF of Chorabari Lake. Okay, now the point is that the water of this particular lake was significantly absorbed by the NHPC power plants. But then NHPC power plant was forced to release this particular water, because I was there in the internship. I asked this particular question to my seniors. Why exactly did this happen? If flood control was so efficient in Uttarakhand, how did this happen? So they told me one straight reply. If we would have not relieved this particular water from the dam, if this dam water was not released, it would have resulted in the flooding of the entire Uttarakhand. So district versus the state, that was the consideration that was to be made, and they were forcibly, they had to do this. Okay, so this is something which caused destruction around the Kedarnath shrine. Okay, so these are three major events which are related to this. So how exactly are you going to deal with respect to the glacial lake outburst flood? So there are glacial lakes, they are natural, they are present everywhere. Wherever you have glaciers, you will be having a glacial lake. Now the first thing that you will need is to identify the ones which are very, very critical with respect to their water level and the quality of their moraine. Okay, so that's the first thing. But what of them are actually the ones which are nearing their breaching point? Okay, and which of them are actually showing the signs of accelerated melting or frequent landslides or avalanche? Because you will have to somehow stabilize them as well. So we have seen how we can, you can say, stabilize avalanche as well. Controlled explosions can reduce the amount of snowfall. That is one of the things. Second, when you talk about glaciers which are actually having accelerated melting, again they are on the risk of having this avalanche. And apart from the avalanche, it is going to come down with a lot of debris as well. So these are the ones which need to be first of all mapped out. Okay, and then subsequently an inventory of both of these, glacial and landslide lake, both of them have to be maintained in a very rigorous fashion. Where do they exist? What is the amount of water they hold? How much far is the distance of the nearest settlement? That needs to be done on a geographical information system, GIS. Then subsequently also involve the local communities of shepherds and mountain nomads. So these are basically the tribes who practice transhumans, because these are the individuals who are going to have their herds go to the grazing grounds nearby. All the alpine meadows where you, let us say, you talk about Bhotias, you talk about Gujjar Bakarwals. So they are basically the ones who very frequently visit these sites with their herds. Okay, so they are the ones who can actually report to you directly what exactly has been the situation at these lakes. Okay, so these are basically the ones that can be used as a local intelligence for monitoring the terrain changes. So this is something which is the first step that needs to be done. Okay, then what exactly can you do as structural measures? So the only thing that is required to be done is to manage the pressure on the walls, okay, or on the moraines. How exactly can you do that? Reduce the volume of water somehow. And in order to do that, you will need some, you can say, outlet from which this water can be removed. Okay, so that's the first one. Remove this particular volume of water before it turns hazardous. How can that be done? Either you can have controlled output of this particular water. Okay, you can be building in some kind of channels, and then this water needs to be deposited somewhere else. Okay, and from there you are going to use that particular water for various purposes. That can be the first one. Okay, Because you will not be able to reinforce moraines. Why will you not be able to reinforce moraines? Because they will always be having water percolated in them. So the cement is not going to stick. Okay, so you cannot do that. But yes, what you can do is build some kind of channel, and at certain distance you can have a kind of storage structure. Okay. The second thing, that any kind of infrastructure development that has to happen at the top reaches of the mountain should not be using heavy machinery, meaning those machinery that create a lot of vibrations when they are going to use when they are going to work. So that is why those machinery that can be assembled on the site and then used with minimal amount of vibrations for the purpose of slope stabilization, for the purpose of controlled breach of the avalanche. Okay, that is how you are going to use these particular things, so that the transportation is reduced, the vibrations that are going to be induced is going to be reduced, and then subsequently that is something which will prevent the incidence of landslide and avalanches as well. Okay, so GLOF will also include the mitigation for the purpose of landslide and avalanche. Okay, so slope stabilization measures, somehow managing the amount of ice that is actually present on the snow mountains. So that is something which needs to be managed. Okay, only then you will be able to manage the water flow here. So here basically when you talk about the early warning system, so here the first thing is monitoring the things. So this is something which has to happen from the satellite imagery. Okay, so all through the Himalayan mountain range you have these glacial lake outbursts. Okay, so these glacial lakes are present everywhere. Wherever there will be a cirque, there will be a tarn lake at the bottom. That is what is the glacial lake. Okay. The second thing, where exactly are you seeing that there is any kind of event that may be related to cloudburst, that may be related to accelerated melting, tectonic activity, that needs to be managed very accurately. Then as soon as you find one of their probabilities, you have to issue the warnings. Okay. Then in these reservoirs, what needs to be done? There needs to be first of all water gauges that you put in with respect to the dams. So such water gauges must be installed here as well. Now this is a very difficult thing, because this water gauge will also need some kind of mounting on the structure, and if you disturb the moraine structure, it can result into a flood. Okay, so this is a very difficult thing. So that is why there needs to be some other way in which we are trying to ascertain what is the depth of water. Okay, what is the level of water here. Then at the same time there needs to be certain sensors which are going to then trigger the warning via satellite communication. Okay, so this is something which will be early warning system. Then when you talk about spatial planning and regulation, so again you will not want to have any kind of habitation zone in those areas which are critically close towards the flood, these particular lakes. So do you remember when we were doing moraines, at that particular moment of time I showed you a picture where there was a large lake and a terminal moraine, and shortly after that there was a settlement, and I told you that once this particular settlement, this wall breaks, this settlement will nowhere be seen. Okay, so that is why we need to establish very strictly no habitation zones in those regions which are near this particular you can say glacial lakes. Okay, then at the same time when you talk about buildings which are like hospitals and schools, they must be the one which should be made with retrofitted structures, meaning stilted construction, and then you can say pumping out of water, so pump houses should be there. Okay, there should be rainwater harvesting that should be there. Okay, so that is something which needs to be done. And then what are the evacuation routes that are required to be taken by the various residents or affected people to reach the nearest such evacuation shelter. Okay, that needs to be done. Then when you talk about the specialized response, you are going to find this particular system everywhere. Somewhere it will be called as command center, somewhere it will be called as response center, and the only you can say meaning of this is to have a structure which is ready with respect to the administration to issue orders and coordinate the response. So every kind of severity of the event is going to have a different you can say SOP, standard operating plan or procedure. Okay, then subsequently we need to give satellite communication to the people who are living in such areas, because here network connectivity is very weak. And in India, satellite communication over the land is illegally banned. Okay, so that is why we do not have any of the satellite phone manufacturing companies selling their phones in India. Okay, because for civilian population it is banned. It is allowed only in the regions of you can say oceans navigation. On the land it is banned. What happened? DSNL is a cellular operator. It's not a satellite communication phone. Satellite. It is their satellite, no communication. Here the satellites are different. Okay. So when you talk about these satellite phones, this is satellite communication is only there with respect to the military and the navigation. Okay, but that too when you are on the sea. On the land, satellite based communication is right now prohibited. Okay, but then when you talk about these regions, the only way to communicate with them is to either via walkie talkie or for that matter satellite communication. Okay, so that is why that's the next thing. Here one very important part is managing the casualties, because when you talk about the fatalities that are going to happen, you will not find them, you can say, intact with their body. You will find a lot of dismembered parts. Okay, so then how are you going to identify the casualty? So for that, DNA fingerprinting for all of those individuals who have lost their life, so that everyone who basically wants a closure of where exactly their family person or loved one is, they can understand this. Okay, so yes, a very specific area of responsibility will always be the management of dead bodies. That will always be a very, you can say, heart-wrenching kind of event, but that is a very important responsibility that you will be having. Okay, now let us move towards urban flooding. Okay, so in urban flooding we have seen that here the cause of flooding is completely different. It is not related to, for that matter, flash flood. Sorry, it is not related to cloudburst. It is not related to glacial outburst flood. Here the reason is torrential rainfall, and that too because of the microclimatic zones that have been created. Because of the great amount of climate change that we see in the world, there are many places which are receiving sporadic and heavy rainfall. Okay, without any warning, any trigger. You will not be able to understand what caused this rainfall. Okay, one such rainfall actually happened when I was traveling in Delhi. I was in metro at that particular time, and when I boarded the metro, it was bright and sunny. Okay, two stations, when I traveled 2 stations ahead, the entire sky turned dark. Okay, and dark in the sense it was 4 o'clock in the evening. Okay, and it felt like it is 7 o'clock, that dark. Within 2 stations, and in Delhi metro, the distance per station is about 2 to 3 minutes. So within a matter of 6 minutes this happened. And by the time I deboarded, it rained so heavily that the entire concourse was filled with hailstones, and it felt like I am walking on snow. Okay, all the things down at the bottom of the metro station, everything was flooded. We could not go down from the metro station, and that time we felt lucky. Okay, we are at least inside the metro premises, because when you talk about the various you can say squatters who are there, all the people who drive auto rickshaw and all, they basically were struggling to get their vehicles out. So much of water. Okay, and barely it was a 20-minute journey for me. So that is something which triggers flash floods, or you can say torrential rainfall. So torrential rainfall is sudden heavy amount of rainfall that happens, maybe for long duration, maybe for short duration. In 2025 also, I'll show you the images. Okay, we faced such a thing in Delhi. Okay, it started raining and it did not stop. It did not stop for several days. It kept on raining, and it rained till such an extent that almost till the level of this switchboard, the water was deposited in parks. This particular switchboard, that is the amount of water that was there in front of my park, the place where I live. Okay, that amount of water. Why? Because first of all, the foundations are concrete. Even if that is a park, but the foundations are still concrete. Okay, so whatever amount of water could be there, that could be absorbed, that was absorbed. Okay, and then the water filled up the entire boundary. Okay, and the funny event was that in that particular thing, all the benches, they started floating over that particular water. So all the benches were floating, and over them were floating all the people of Delhi. So that is what happened. Delhi is very peculiar on this. Okay, you will find a lot of places where it actually you are going to see that a lot of water gets logged during such rainfall, and then subsequently what happens is that in that particular time, what is done, people actually go for swimming. Wow, powerful punch. What did you do? Why did you do that? I mean, what drove you to do that? Just like that. Okay, so it's like Iron Man. Yeah, flash. Okay. So here the flooding is because of that reason. Okay. So for monitoring urban floods, we have the Ministry of Urban Development that monitors urban flood and then subsequently talks about the various things. Do you know what is this? Where is Red Fort in this? Just because it is red sandstone, you said it's Red Fort. Well, this time your guess is correct. This is the boundary of Red Fort. Okay. This is the external boundary. How many of you have seen Special Ops, Hotstar, KK Menon? So the place where he gets shot is here. Okay. And this is Red Fort's compound. There is one building of government, they do something there, they don't tell what they do. Okay, so there are a lot of government officials here. No one talks to you. And here is the beautiful Red Fort. This is what was there. And are you seeing this? These are people enjoying. Literally people enjoying. They are not evacuation. There is no evacuation here. There is nothing downstream. This part is something which is actually you can say the embankment. There is nothing here. Okay, everyone is supposed to use this. They are here. Yeah, that is not dirt. That are people. Those are people, individual people. No. So you will find one here. You will find one here. Now that is a boating site for them. Okay. So the place where you find Red Fort and opposite to this is Chandni Chowk. Okay. So that is why it is said overlooking from the Red Fort, what you are going to see straight is Chandni Chowk. So this is actually the entry to one of the gates. There are many gates to enter into Red Fort, many gates. And this water actually comes from Yamuna. Okay. So this is Yamuna flooding and people enjoying. So this is how the Red Fort is. Okay. But it was not just here. Yes. Doesn't matter. See, when you talk about Delhi, I'll tell you something very funny about Delhi. People do not actually face a lot of rainfall during this time. So whatever amount of rainfall happens, most of the people prefer taking it head on. Okay, instead of finding shelter, they would come out on the streets and they would enjoy, they would dance, they would go to their terrace. Because rainfall at this particular moment of time is very low in Delhi. Okay, temperatures are high, humidity is high, so people need that. So when this kind of rainfall happens, so the first 2 days are pool party. Okay, here before you are coming here, this particular road, okay, this goes ahead to something which is known as Interstate Bus Terminal, India's largest bus terminal. Okay, Kashmiri Gate, and there the entire Kashmiri Gate gets flooded, and it gets flooded with water, then it gets flooded with people. Okay, they would come in, they would dive into that particular water, swim across. That is what they do. So yeah, Delhi is crazy that way. This water is polluted, doesn't matter. We'll see to it later. We have hospitals for that, no? That's the thing. Okay. Everything is flooded with people. Okay. So this is one part of the story. Okay. Now this is still old Delhi. The picture that I am going to show you now basically is from the place where most of the people in Delhi's administration live, including the Chief Minister and the Lieutenant Governor. That is known as civil lines. Okay. This is how civil lines looked like. It is a very place with affluent, you can say, people living here. Okay, all imperial British kind of buildings. Okay, Lieutenant Governor lives here, your Chief Minister lives here. Okay, a lot of people, they live here. This is the road. This is the residence. Okay, so when this particular thing happened, now this is civil lines. Okay, and this water remained here for about 10 days. It remained here. You can't do anything about it, no. Drains are choked. Rainfall is happening every 3 to 4 hours. Okay, so the only people who are actually living here, this is when the inequality in Delhi got very stark. Okay, because all these people who live in these places, now this is a proper temple where people stop. See what exactly is there. So what technically happened was that this particular region is the one which houses a lot of wealthy families of Delhi, very wealthy families of Delhi, okay, very affluent people. All of them left their caretakers at the home. They went away. So that is when, I mean, the income inequality, it became very stark. Now this place was without power for 20 days. 20 days without power. Where, how can you risk this? You can't risk power. Okay, these people were without power for 20 days. Now just imagine, this is urban floods 2025, Delhi. Okay, it became very difficult even for us to understand where exactly the water flowing in one direction. Is it flowing in this direction or is it flowing in that direction? That amount of water. We have never seen, I have never seen it in Delhi till last year. Okay, so initially it was fun for people, then it became very difficult for us. Okay, but then gradually the things started receding. Earlier this water was above this part as well. Now this water is controlled. Not like this, because my locality is actually in central Delhi, so it is having a kind of slopes. Okay, not as sharp as these, but that is on the slope, so the water does not stop, it goes down. But yes, with respect to the water, if you want to see it, yes, it was there. Okay, so when you talk about urban flooding, what exactly are the causes? First cause will be replacement of all the natural ways in which water can be absorbed by concretization. So this is going to be encroachment of all the wetlands, lakes, floodplains for the purpose of real estate. Very, very common. This happens everywhere. Okay, and because of this, all the natural you can say sources where the water can be absorbed, that is something which is lost. Then expansion of infrastructure. Okay, roads, they are basically the ones which are now going to replace the soil and that surface. This is going to reduce the absorbing capacity. Okay, so because of this, what happens is that soil infiltration is nearly zero. The water keeps on dropping on the road. Now basically, if you have seen, when you drive, you must have seen this, that the roads usually have this kind of structure. At the center it is slightly raised, and at the other side it slopes on that particular direction, and there are, you can say, channels from which water actually flows down. Okay, so there are a lot of such elevated you can say flyovers in Delhi. Then subsequently we have the entire Bharatmala Pariyojana. Based upon that, we have very good highways, just the way you just saw the Ambala highway I just showed to you, one of the best highways. Okay, talk about going to Agra, Mathura, that place has very nice highways, but all of them are elevated, meaning whatever water falls over them, that needs to come down, and downwards is where the settlements are. You can elevate the corridor, but that is only road. If you have to actually, you must have seen this here also, whenever you are traveling from one place to the other, there are elevated flyover corridors that actually make you cross the entire city as a bypass. If you have to go into that particular city, you have to take the exit and get inside, right? So what technically happens, that elevation is nothing, the city is downstairs, so all this water is going down. What is going to happen there? It is going to flood them. That's it. So this is one of the major disadvantages of Bharatmala Pariyojana. You will not be able to manage this. So that is why Bharatmala Pariyojana is not just about making these roads, it's also about making these municipalities understand that you have to manage the drain water. Okay, the next thing, that you do not have the right kind of plans for the purpose of making the drains. So whatever has been the ancient structure, from there you have started making the same thing again and again. So because of that, what happens is that when you talk about the capacity of these drainage lines, they have been limited, they have never been expanded. Whatever existed first, you reconstructed it again. Okay, you did not expand it. So in that particular scenario, what happens is that all this water that gets into that particular drain, once the drain is filled, now this water will come back. That is what is known as backward flow of water. Okay, so that is why we see this particular thing happening. Then stormwater drains that I was talking about, this is something which does not usually is found to be effective in most of the cities. First of all, they do not exist. In most of the places they do not exist. Where they do exist, the assumption is wrong. Okay, the assumption is wrong that the cities do not receive a lot of water, So that is why these storm channels also have very small capacity. So again the same thing, heavy amount of rainfall, overflowing. Okay, that is why this is also something which is seen. And now the frequency of cloudburst related incidents, torrential rains is increasing every single year. And this will increase in the future because of the global warming. Why? Because of global warming, we will have a lot of warm air which can evaporate a lot of water. So wherever there will be convection, at that particular moment there will be very heavy kind of clouds that will be built up. Okay, so that is the thing. Then unregulated dumping of municipal solid waste. Okay, now this is something which has caused the degradation of not only the soil but also made the soil non-porous. Why? Because now there is intrusion of plastics into the soil in the landfill regions. Further, at the same time, they have also been dumped into the drains, and because of that the drains have become clogged. So that is why every single year you would see that sometimes in the entire year the municipality is going to undertake the process of cleaning some of the drains. Okay, so but that happens in some of the regions and the other regions are forgotten. So that is something which leads to these kind of problems. Okay, so that's the thing. Then apart from that, what happens is that because of the urban heat island effect. Okay, so why exactly is there an urban heat island? Because when you talk about a city has got roads, okay, it has got buildings, all of them are dark in color, okay, less amount of soil. So what technically happens is that there is a localized heating of this entire region. So when there is a heating of this particular region, it actually creates low pressure zones, which is then going to attract winds. Now when this particular convection is going to happen and the winds come in, if that is something which is going to create rainfall, that will lead to urban flooding. So urban heat island effect is another such reason why this torrential rainfall can happen. Okay, so this is how you see that urban flooding can happen either due to urban heat islands, this can happen due to torrential rain during monsoons. Sometimes they could also be due to you can say the western disturbances in the northern India, not in the South India. Okay, but the coastal cities, again they are the ones which are going to have the you can say the damage with respect to the coastal flooding. Okay, so when you talk about Calcutta, you talk about Mumbai, you talk about Chennai, so these are basically the places which are vulnerable to you can say coastal flooding as well. And because of that, what happens when the coastal flooding happens, that also chokes sometimes the drains. So when that is choking the drains, that is something which is again going to cause the problems downstream. So this water will again come back and that will discharge on the streets. Okay, so what exactly are the dimensions and what exactly are the impacts? So for the humans, the first impact will always be fatality and damage to property. Okay, so loss of life, then waterborne diseases. Now here it will have a very devastating impact. Why? Because most of the water that actually comes on flooding is dirty water coming from sewage, and that is the storehouse of all the kinds of pathogens. So that is why waterborne diseases like you can have dengue, you can have cholera. So these are basically the ones which will be significantly high in incidence. Okay, and because of the you can say the flooded compartments, you will not be able to move for emergency health care. Okay, that is a very important thing. Then displacement of the vulnerable slum population, because most of the slum is something which is found on the floodplain regions, in those regions which are dangerously close to such places. Okay, then when you talk about economic, here there will be damage to property, there will be damage to all the kinds of communication, network, electricity, everything that will be damaged. A lot of your transformers will be damaged. Okay, then because of that, people will not be able to reach to their offices. If they are not reaching their offices, then there will be no significant amount of work done. That is another thing. Then when you talk about infrastructure, this is one of the biggest thing that we see in India. Okay, our acid test for the quality of road is this: how many rainfall before your first pothole develops. Okay, that is what is the acid test for us. So poor quality of construction. And further, why does this pothole formation happens? Because when you talk about the rainfall, or for that matter the water which flows in the urban flood, that is highly acidic. Okay, acidic in the sense when it is actually in the municipal drainage, everything is mixed into it. So the pH is different. If you're talking about the rainfall, that has some amount of carbon dioxide mixed into it. Sometimes it will have sulfuric acid mixed into it. So that is something which is going to eat up the asphalt. Okay, then roads completely get washed out. Now this is something that is very common with respect to all the you can say unmetalled roads that are there in the country. Sometimes it also happens that there are certain tunnels which overflow. Okay, so the roads can get washed out, the bridges can get washed out. This is something which can happen. Okay, then metro stations. So metro stations get flooded. I hope you have not stuck, you are never stuck in such situations. Metro stations or underpasses, they very quickly get yes, subways, they get very quickly flooded. Okay, then critical server rooms and basements, they get flooded. So this is something which also happened in 2025 only. This happened in you know Rouse IAS, Rouse IAS. That incident of drowning of the students that happened at the basement library, that was a result of urban flooding. Okay, and now this particular building is adjacent to Wajiram in Delhi, the building where this happened, and that particular building has been always in the depression zone where all the water in that particular region comes and collects. Okay, despite that they had a basement library which was biometrically accessible. So when the flood water started coming in, the biometric system went into a lockdown. So there was no way that you could come out. So the students there, they succumbed. Okay, that is what happened. Okay, then when you talk about ecological damage, there will be a lot of ecological damage. Why? There will be a lot of mixing of various different pollutants with the soil. There will be soil erosion. Then at the same time, this water is also going to contaminate the lower levels of underground water reservoirs. So that is why we see that urban floods have their own dimensions of things with respect to the you can say damage that they could do. Now, how exactly are you going to manage urban floods? So managing urban floods basically is very difficult with respect to you can say prediction. There can only be one thing. You can understand where exactly the construction is and what kind of construction has happened. Based upon that, you can be going for retrofitting structures. Okay, new structures will need stringent enforcement, but old structures will need retrofitting. You cannot do anything about it. Okay, so that is why urban flood management cells have been established so that they can be managing these floods, especially in the metropolitan regions. Okay, then at the same time, all the you can say observation stations that are actually there of the IMD, they are all equipped with automatic rainfall gauges. Okay, so that is something which is going to continuously relay the amount of rainfall that has happened in a particular place, so that some amount of preparation can be done. Okay, then at the same time, the Doppler weather radar network is something which is going to be expanded so that all the cities and all the important ports are covered with respect to this. Okay, now when we talk about the design of the drainage system, now this is something which has now been based upon the catchment area base. Now what exactly is catchment? Catchment is basically receiving the water from all the sources together. Okay, so now the design of any kind of drainage system throughout the country is basically done on this particular region. That how exactly the water is going to be collected in the land and what is the direction of flow of water overall. Okay, so in that particular manner you have the catchment area, catchment based drainage system design. So here basically what is going to happen, you are going to lay down the storm tunnels in that particular fashion only. Okay, where exactly is the first instance of having torrential rain and what exactly is the structure of handling that particular water, where the water will flow, and when the water is flowing, so we will be having channels to have that particular water collected and then draining into the river. Okay, so that is something which is being done. Then at the same time, the runoff coefficient for the other coming drains is something which is higher. So it basically means what is the amount of water that it can hold and it can make you can say it can allow to flow. So runoff coefficient actually talks about the velocity of the water which will be there in the channel. Okay, so that needs to be very high, and all the drains of the country, okay, all the drains of the country must be desilted by this time every year. But this is something which is a difficult to manage target. Most of the time this does not happen. Why? Many of the cities in the country are facing various kinds of problems. Okay, by March 31, some of us we do not experience any rainfall. Some of us we experience heavy rainfall. Okay, so that is why this is something which is a difficult target to manage. But usually it is advised that before the monsoons arrive, in the time of peak summers, you should be done with this particular desilting and cleaning of all the drains in your particular jurisdiction. Okay, but then this is something which again comes up with a new problem, and that problem is when you are desilting and cleaning these drains, where are you going to take all the solid material that you have taken out? So that is why most of the time what they do, they are going to put it right adjacent to the drain. Next time the rain happens, they again go back. Okay. So one part is cleaning, the next part is disposing. So that disposing is something that people don't usually think of. Okay. So that is basically what is done. Now, what are the other aspects of urban flood management that could be done? So first of all, removal of any kind of encroachments on drains and water courses. Okay. So that basically means that all those places which are wetlands or those regions which absorb water naturally based upon the research, these places should not have any kind of human development. Okay. And if anything exists there, especially the slums, that should be rehabilitated. So there has to be a regularized colony at a certain place which is away from this and it does not hamper the city. Now this is something which is known as the JJ colony in Delhi. Okay. So all the JJ colonies are actually regularized slums, although they were already encroached on the land. But the point is that first of all they were taken up from there and they were resettled at other places. Okay. So today they are known as JJ colonies. Then rainwater harvesting needs to be one of the most important aspects of fighting urban flood management. Okay. So that is why in cities like Chennai, okay, so this is something which is implemented by default in their laws. Okay, the municipal laws are the ones which mandate that every household, every commercial establishment, they have to have rainwater harvesting system. Why? Because when it is going to receive rainfall in the winters, this water needs to be recaptured into the ground. Because Chennai is one such place which faces water scarcity. Okay, so it's a very, very important step for them. But apart from that, other cities as well. So rainwater harvesting system needs to be there. And then restoring the urban water bodies so that they could be used as a natural retention basin. Now this is something which is inspired by Bangalore. Okay, because Bangalore has a lot of such huge water bodies where most of the water gets stored or the terrain is such that it makes the water flow in those directions. Okay, so that is why this is something which is made for that, but still it is found that many of these places have been having heavy amount of siltation. Okay, so that needs to be cleared so that the natural capacity of the reservoir is restored. Then we have GIS mapping. So this is basically the mapping of all cities and towns on a GIS platform that is going to be having the structural map of which particular region is more prone to urban flooding. Okay, and based upon that, what happens is that you are able to have many layers. You can on a GIS map, what can happen is that you can be running certain simulations. Okay, based upon the various layers which are involved in this particular map, you can be running certain simulations. What could be the impact of various kinds of you can say natural hazards, and based upon that you could be preparing your own plan. Okay, so that is basically GIS and inundation planning. Then again the response will have the same thing, and a response system and then emergency evacuation centers. Now these particular centers are the one which are going to be you can say functioning with respect to rescuing of the people, delivering of food and other articles, and then also taking the injured to the hospitals. Okay, that is one part of the story. All the major infrastructure projects like railways, airports, which are critical for the purpose of communication and transportation, they need to have flood management done in their particular premises. Okay, so that is why you see that airports are one of the last regions to actually get flooded. Again, this was something which was this myth was broken in 2025 in Delhi again, because Delhi's Terminal 1 had a newly constructed you can say facade at the center, at the outside, that collapsed in the first rain. Okay, so then again the system of accountability, the high quality construction came into picture, and it also resulted in the you can say death of 2 cab drivers. Okay, that happened. Then this also means that we should also be involving the resident welfare associations. So resident welfare associations are the most basic level of urban governance which are present. Okay, they are basically the ones which are legalized for the purpose of taking care of whatever are the civic requirements or the amenity requirements of a particular region. Usually every society has a resident welfare association. Now this resident welfare association needs to be registered with the government, and then the government sends them some amount of money for the purpose of various things. So these resident welfare associations are the one which need to be roped in for the purpose of management of urban flooding, training of the people, and at the same time monitoring what exactly is going wrong in their regions. So this is basically the reporting structure that will then be taken up by the administration. Okay, so when you talk about such cases which have been there in the country, so we have seen Chennai. Chennai is a very, very common example of urban flooding. Okay, so that usually happens during the winters, and mostly during that particular time there, that is a cyclone season of Chennai. Okay, when you talk about the months of July to September, that is the cyclone season of the coast of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. But when you talk about Chennai, the cyclone season is basically in the months of November and December. Okay, so at that particular moment of time, we have found this, that the floodplains of Adyar and Kuam, they are basically the ones where the encroachment has happened, a lot of real estate development has happened, and at the same time, here the wetlands which were there, they were overwhelmed. So this resulted into the flooding of Chennai. Okay, so that has happened twice, 2015, 2023. But even when you talk about, when in 2023, I was actually taking one of the classes for Chennai students. Okay, so they could not come to the class because they were getting stuck in the floods. Okay, so it's a severe problem there. Then you have Bangalore. So in Bangalore also there is the historic expansion over Vrishabhavati and Rajakal. Come again. Rajakalu. What exactly are these? There are a lot of you can say step wells and canals which are there with respect to Karnataka that have been built historically by various of the rulers. They are the ones which are getting destroyed. Okay, and they actually lead to some of the step wells which are there in various places. Okay, one such is when you talk about the Adil Shahi regime here, Kol Gumbaz. There you, yes? Yeah, so what basically happens is that there you have the step wells. So they are subsurface drainage that were actually built for the storation of water, and from there it would be sent to the people. Now these are the ones which are actually getting destroyed. Okay, that is something which has led to severe flooding. Delhi is also like that. All the old structures are gone, new structures are heavily concretized. We have a lot of overpopulation, lot of pollution, and that is why we see that a lot of drain outlets are completely choked. Okay, so this is something which is hampering us a lot. Then when you talk about Mumbai, Mumbai basically faces two threats. One is heavy monsoon. When you talk about the southwest monsoon, that causes a lot of rainfall, and at the same time there is a lot of tidal blockaging that happens from the tides. Because when you talk about Mumbai, Mumbai is made on reclaimed land. Mumbai was not supposed to be a city, that was supposed to be inundated with water. Now when this particular island was actually, there were 7 islands of Mumbai. That were, do you know the story of Mumbai? So Mumbai actually were a group of 7 islands which were given to the British as a dowry for the purpose of a matrimonial alliance. Okay, then the British actually gave it on rent of 10 rupees per annum to East India Company. 10 rupees per annum. Okay, so then the East India Company started making those, I told you about the sea walls, no, Gateway of India and all. They started making those sea walls. Then after making the sea walls, what happened was that now the water was stopped at the coast, and whatever was the water here, it was pumped out. And then the land which was reclaimed is what you know as Mumbai. So that is why Mumbai is something which is very, very prone to urban flooding. Because of two reasons. One, heavy rainfall. Two, tidal inlets that block their storm drains. And when the storm drains are blocked, which are already built by the British, not by the you can say the government after that. So these are the ones which get overwhelmed, they get blocked, and that floods Mumbai. Okay. So this is all about urban floods. Any doubt till now? Okay, then I'll leave you to it. Okay, we are done with the class today, and this is all with respect to the various kinds of floods that are there in the country. Now tomorrow what we are going to discuss is certain questions which have been cross-functional for GS1 and GS3. Okay, we'll be doing that, and then subsequently we'll be done with this. Okay, any doubts? Chalo. Thank you so much.